The Jets failed to build on their victory against the Browns last week. Yesterday, they were defeated handily by the Cincinnati Bengals at MetLife Stadium. An awful lot went wrong, and we'll talk about it all today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, September 26th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangrenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free, and it's available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening. You'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. Well, unfortunately, we are not here to break down a second straight Jets victory today. We're here to break down a defeat. The Jets fell yesterday to the Cincinnati Bengals, 27-12 at MetLife Stadium. Their record falls to 1-2 on the 2022 season. Yesterday afternoon, I did a postcast after the game, a quick podcast recapping the game. Today, we're doing a little bit more detailed of a breakdown, but I said it at the top of yesterday's postcast. This was a game that may have on paper looked like it was a 2-score game. And when you see that, you think, okay, maybe the Jets were in it. And the Jets actually did drive the ball deep into Cincinnati territory early in the fourth quarter. With around 10 minutes left, they had the ball. They were driving. They were in Bengals territory. They're only down 15 points. But it never really felt to me like the Bengals were in any danger in this game, because whenever the Jets even had the slightest opportunity, you felt like they were going to get in their own way. I said on Friday's show that I felt like the start of this game was going to be really important, because Bengals coming in at 0-2, 2 bad losses to 2 quarterbacks who really aren't that great. The Jets had a chance to put some doubt in this team early in the game, and they failed to do it essentially from the opening kickoff, because the Bengals took the ball and went right down the field. They converted a couple of third downs, and they scored a touchdown on an 11-play drive. And once that happens, it felt like the Bengals kind of said, okay, now we're okay now. We finally have a lead. They had not played with a lead so far this season. They felt like they had figured this Jets defense out. And I got to say, on that drive, I mean, DJ Reed got beaten once by T. Higgins, but I mean, it was an ugly start by the defensive line. You know, if you look at like the total numbers in this game, I think you're probably going to find that the pressure numbers don't look that bad for the Jets. But early in the game, when the Bengals jumped out in front, the defensive line was nowhere to be found, and it kind of set the tone early in this game. So the Jets were down 7-0, and they get the ball back, and they actually put together a decent drive. But then Joe Flacco misses Breece Hall on what should have been an easy touchdown. Hall was open, and Hall, I don't want to let Hall off the hook because Hall has some blame there. You know, when there's a misfire, when the receiver still can catch it, people like to put either 100% of the blame on the quarterback or 100% on the receiver. It was a little bit of both. If Flacco just lays the ball out in front of Hall, it's probably an easy catch. The pass was underthrown. Hall had to turn. It turned it into a tougher catch. It still was a catch he could have made. The Jets had to settle for a field goal. So they're down 7-3 when they could have tied the game. They could have had a big answer, but they failed to do that. They caught a break right after that, because on the next series, Jamar Chase fumbled on a first down play, on a reception, and I thought it was a very bang-bang play. I was surprised the Jets were able to get the call, but they're not able to do anything with that drive. They get the ball in Cincinnati territory on the Bengals 43, and they end up having to settle for a field goal. So it was 7-6. And then came the sequence that I felt like really kind of really changed the game. The Bengals got the ball back. They're up 7-6 late in the first quarter, and the Jets actually get a stop on third down, but the drive gets extended because John Franklin Myers hits Burrow late. It's a personal foul, a 15-yard penalty to extend the drive. So the Jets are off the field. They're getting the ball back 7-6. And then Franklin Myers just commits a horrible penalty. And then the Jets get into the third down. Joe Burrow hits Tyler Boyd over the middle for a first down, or what should have been a first down. But for whatever reason, Jordan Whitehead just doesn't he looks like he's going for the big hit. He doesn't wrap. and he whiffs on a tackle on Boyd and kind of takes Carter out, and Boyd scampers off to the end zone to make it 14-6. That really was, even though it was, not that early in the game, even though it was early in the game, even though it was late first quarter, I mean, that kind of was a turning point, a huge turning point in this game. The Bengals were able to add a couple field goals. Flacco threw a terrible interception. The Jets got a field goal right before half. So it was 20-9 heading to halftime. And even heading to the locker room, I felt like if the Jets could turn it around, maybe this was somewhat salvageable, because the Jets really could not have played a worse first half, I think, on either side of the ball. But they went to the locker room and they were only down 11 points. Unfortunately, on the first series of the second half, Flacco took a sack. George Fant was just beaten clean by Trey Hendrickson and fumbled the ball away. The Bengals got the ball deep in Jets territory. They took over at the 24-yard line, and then on a 3rd and goal play, a few plays later from the 5, the Jets busted coverage again. The 4th time they busted a coverage for a touchdown in 3 games, and it was very similar to last week where it was on the goal line. Sauce Gardner, there was some miscommunication. Somehow the Jets end up with Jamar Chase completely uncovered, which is not a great idea. It's never a great idea to leave a receiver uncovered. Never a great idea to leave a receiver uncovered in a goal line situation. It's especially bad of an idea when it's Jamar Chase. But obviously the design was not to leave him uncovered. There was a breakdown. You had 2 guys taking 1 guy, and Chase went uncovered. But that's a guy, if you're a defender, you want to account for him. So the Bengals were up 27-9. The Jets added a field goal to make it 27-12. And then really the key sequence late in the game, the 4th quarter, the Jets put together an 11-play drive. And this was, as if you're watching at home, you missed a lot of this drive because CBS lost its feed during this drive as the Jets got into scoring range. Unfortunately, on a 4th down play, Connor McGovern, who had come in for George Fant after the injury, after the strip sack early in the second half, Fant left the game with an injury. I think Fant was playing hurt, and then at that point, because he had a rough game, he had allowed another sack. He had committed a penalty. Fant really has not been playing well this year, and he's been on the injury report every week. He's been missing practice every week. I think it's kind of clear Fant's been playing hurt, and I think he realized he just couldn't go anymore after that sack. Well, Connor McGovern comes in and just is awful the entire time he's in there. On 4th and 6 from the Cincinnati 14, McGovern just gets beaten cleanly. I don't think Flacco ever had a shot. He's sacked. He fumbles. It doesn't really matter if he fumbles because it's 4th down. And the Jets give the ball back to the Bengals with about 10 minutes to go in the game. So the Bengals are trying to run the clock out. They essentially run 8 minutes off the clock on a 13-play drive. It ends in a missed field goal, so the Bengals don't get any points, but they run 8 of the 10 minutes they need to run off the clock. And on this 13-play drive, there are only 2 designed pass plays. So they do it. The Jets know they're running. The Bengals run, and the Jets can't stop it. And that's the end of an ugly loss. It was ugly on offense. Jets could not get into the end zone. On defense, it was brutal. Pretty much everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Really, I think the only player from the Jets side who could be happy with their performance in this game was the kicker, Greg Zuerlein, who was 4 for 4. So where do we begin? I'm going to begin by talking about how bad the defense was. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about all of the many ways that the defense failed the Jets in this game. Well, of course, it's always tricky when you're a fantasy football player when your real team has an opponent. Do you grab the players your opponent has? Do you root against your own team? Well, if you picked some Bengals yesterday, they did better than their projections, so maybe it's a little bit of solace. Maybe it's a situation where you can't lose because if your team does well, you're happy. If they do poorly, at least your fantasy team does well. Well, I can't tell you how to solve that dilemma, but what I can tell you is how PrizePicks works. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their projection at PrizePicks, you win up to 10 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you against the projections available. And if you don't want to grab Jets opponents, maybe you just want to stay away from the NFL in general, there are plenty of other ways you can play PrizePicks. They have Major League Baseball projections. The NHL season's beginning soon. You can do golf. You can do college football. You can do esports, soccer. You can do NASCAR. And somehow you can do disc golf. Entries are made in 30 seconds or less. It's that easy. There are safe and fast withdrawals, and they are currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. So that means if you deposit $100, PrizePicks gives you $100. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign-in for an instant deposit match of up to $100. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. The show's free and available on all platforms. Today we are recapping an ugly Jets loss. On paper, it was a 15-point loss. In reality, it felt like more than that. I mean, through the second half, it might as well have been 30. Even though the Jets were technically in the game on paper, it just was not going to happen. You could feel it. Even as the Jets were driving in the second half, down 15, getting into Bengals territory, I never felt like they were a serious threat to win the game. And a lot of it goes back to the defense. And I told you, right as this game begins, the Jets fail to get off the field. And it doesn't matter. They're rushing forward, they're blitzing. They can't get to Joe Burrow. And the Bengals go right down the field, easy touchdown. But what was amazing about this game was that the Jets defense failed in every way imaginable. They failed early in the game when the Bengals were throwing the ball all over the field. They could not get a pass rush. I think the corners were okay, but you can't ask these guys to cover forever. And on the play the Bengals scored their first touchdown, it was the one instance on that drive where they actually did get pressure and they couldn't finish it, which was another ongoing story of this game because the Jets did begin to heat up the pressure a little bit later, but they could never finish Joe Burrow. They could never. A couple times Burrow was able to get away from them. Sometimes he hit big plays. Sometimes it wasn't a big play, but he just avoided the sack. The defensive line's just not playing up to its capabilities. We know that there's no elite level pass rusher on this defensive line, but it feels like they're really underachieving at this point. It's one thing to get beaten though. It's one thing to underperform. The mental errors in this game, and then go back to that second touchdown. John Franklin Myers commits, and maybe it should not have been called a penalty, but you never put yourself in a position where you can get in trouble with a bad call. And John Franklin Myers did everything in his power. Listen, they may not have had to throw the flag, but the only scenario where they have an opportunity to throw the flag is when John Franklin Myers hits Joe Burrow late. It was a dumb play. I don't care whether it's a flag or not. You're putting yourself in a position where a flag can go against you. And it may have been a flag anyway. I'm not saying it was necessarily a bad call. I think it could have gone either way. But you put yourself in a position where a bad call is going to go against you by doing something like that. And then Jordan Whitehead, even though the ball's in play at this point, to me, that's a mental error. He's going for a big hit instead of just trying to wrap Tyler Boyd up. And Boyd runs 66 yards to the end zone to end the first quarter. I say this so frequently. The safety position, what you're doing there as much as anything, you're preventing bad plays from turning into catastrophes. And these two safeties the Jets have had this year, LaMarcus Joyner and Jordan Whitehead, they have turned big plays into catastrophes. And on a later drive in the first half, LaMarcus Joyner commits a really bad personal foul penalty. He goes straight helmet to helmet on a play. I believe it was on Jamar Chase. Just mental errors by the Jets defense. And then, you end the game when the Bengals get the ball back with 10 minutes left. So the Jets have essentially done everything they could do wrong. They've failed against the pass early in the game. They've committed mental errors. The only thing they really hadn't done poorly was defend the run. Well, we could forget about that because you knew the Bengals were giving the ball to Samaje Perine in those situations. I knew they were giving the ball to Samaje Perine in those situations. 13 plays. 2 times the Bengals showed any semblance of trying to pass the ball. One of them was a completion. One of them was a play where Burrow just had nothing there, so he slid down. He took an intentional sack to keep the clock running. But the Jets couldn't stop the run. And it doesn't even matter that the Jets did not allow points in that situation because the whole name of the game for the Bengals was taking time off the clock. And the clock went down from about 10 minutes to 2 minutes. The Jets allowed 8 minutes of real time to come off the clock in that. It's just, you can't allow that. So there's nothing you can say about this defense that's playing well. It was like last week. And last week, the defense would have been one of the stories of the game because they allowed 30 points, and it was kind of the same thing. They did a little bit of everything wrong. They were allowing Jacoby Brissett to tear them apart. They were making mental mistakes. A breakdown. Second straight week, the Jets had a breakdown in the red zone where a receiver gets wide open for a touchdown. Last week it was Amari Cooper. This week it's Jamar Chase. Maybe you should make sure the other team's best receiver is covered in the red zone. And then late in the game, last week the Browns wore them down. They started running the ball at will. Same thing this week. That drive that took the clock from 10 minutes to 2 minutes. There has been a lot of resources put into this defense to improve it. And you have to say that even though there are individual spots where the defense is better, I think it's clear that the corner position's better. This was not a perfect game by Sauce Gardner or DJ Reed, but I don't think that they were a weakness. I think they held their own. But even though there are individual spots where this defense is better, as a whole, I'm not sure this defense is better. Here's what I'd say. They've played 3 games so far. The quote-unquote good game for this defense was the game against Baltimore where they allowed 3 touchdowns and had 2 breakdowns on those 3 long touchdowns. This unit's no better, and I don't know if it's coaching. I don't know if it's probably a combination of all of them. I think we always try and single out one culprit when a football team's a complicated thing. When there are many moving parts on a football team, and there are lots of reasons the Jets defense is struggling. And some people want to make it just coaching. It's probably partially coaching. Some people want to make it all the players. It's probably partially the players. Defensive line, a unit where the Jets have thrown a ton of resources, a unit that on paper looks, if not spectacular, it should be a strength. They're not playing up to potential. Linebacker, we knew it was going to be an issue. Unfortunately, the Jets, this was one area in the offseason where you looked at it and it felt like the Jets were not being realistic with what they had. And unfortunately, Quincy Williams got injured. Hope he's okay. I think he was actually having a decent game, but the linebacker play this year has not been good. Safety's been a disaster. At least we kind of knew Joyner was an issue. At least we knew Joyner was a bit of a gamble. Whitehead has been, there's no other way to say it. 3 games in, Whitehead looks like a complete bust, and which is true of almost every player the Jets signed outside of DJ Reed this offseason. But Whitehead looks like a complete bust. This unit is not cohesive. Again, you want to blame the coaching. I think the coaching deserves some blame, but I think the issues go deeper than coaching. I think that guys are not playing to their potential. I think there's bad performances. I think there were some miscalculations in some of the players the Jets signed this offseason. You name it, there's an issue. But this defense doesn't look any better. And this defense is lucky last week that they got bailed out by that miracle win, because we could easily be looking at 0-3 right now with 2 back-to-back awful defensive performances. And I understand the Bengals are loaded with talent at the skill positions. You have to give credit to the opponent. That's part of the equation here. But this unit has to have you concerned. And I think you also have to be concerned about the offense. Now, the Jets do have some good news upcoming. It sounds like Zach Wilson's on track to return this week. But it's going to take more than Zach Wilson's return to get this offense moving completely in the right direction. As we continue on this Monday episode of Locked On Jets, we'll talk about the offense's role in this defeat to the Cincinnati Bengals. Of course, the Jets are on the road this week. They visit the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know if you're traveling to Pittsburgh to the game, but if you do, maybe you need a car. Well, let me tell you about Turo. It's the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a selection of vehicles for just about any occasion, such as going to the Jets-Steelers game, or any budget. And it's across the United States, so Pittsburgh, but also Canada and the UK. You can book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip, or that classic or luxury car for that special event, like going to the Jets-Steelers game. You can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B, or you can even test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on. Many Turo hosts can deliver the car right to you. Each trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo, Turo.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday, recapping a New York Jets loss. It was a loss where almost nobody except the kicker played well. Jets did not get a winning effort from the defense. We talked about that. And they did not get a winning effort from the offense. And listen, we all know Joe Flacco is just not the guy. We know that he's well past his prime. We know the Jets kind of lucked into a win last week with Flacco taking over the last 2 minutes. But even if you look at Flacco's stat line last week, it's very deceptive. I think if you were watching that game, you realize Flacco did not play a stellar game of football against Cleveland. He played well the last 2 minutes, but I mean, it was a very shaky performance by Flacco. We know how limited he is at this point in his career. He's afraid to throw into tight windows, and with good reason, because he doesn't know where to throw into tight windows. Because when he does attempt to throw into tight windows, second half, he kind of realized he had to force the ball into areas where he didn't want to do it, and he had no idea where it was going. I mean, there was one time he even hit the goalpost on one pass where he just threw off his back foot. He was just flinging the ball wherever it went. And I think there was a key point in this game in the first half when Garrett Wilson got hurt, because the offense the last 2 weeks with Garrett Wilson in there, even with Flacco's limitations, it felt like the offense had some life to it with Garrett Wilson, because again, you have a veteran quarterback who's afraid to throw into tight windows. Garrett Wilson was the one guy who was creating separation down the field, adding a little bit of life to the offense, but he left the game with an injury. He took a shot. Sounded like a rib injury. He did return in the second half, but did not really look like himself. And that's a concern because when Zach Wilson gets back into the lineup, Garrett Wilson's a guy you really want to rely on. He's a guy who can make a young quarterback's life easy. In the NFL, it's all about, when you're trying to develop a young quarterback, taking as much off his plate as possible. And when you see a guy running wide open like a Garrett Wilson, the way he runs routes consistently, that's a very good thing for a young quarterback. That's the type of thing that can help him relax. The type of thing where he said, he doesn't need to scan the whole defense. He knows Wilson's going to be open. He can just get him the ball. It's an easy throw to him. So you have to hope Garrett Wilson's okay. And you wonder whether Zach Wilson's returning into that good of a situation at this point, because beyond Garrett Wilson, which is kind of up in the air, maybe more concerning is the offensive line situation. This loss is frustrating, and there are some things you cannot explain away. I think the defensive struggles are really tough to explain based on the resources the Jets threw into them. The offensive issues are a little bit easier to explain because it's tough in the NFL. The Jets did a bad job with backup quarterback. They could have done better, but there are not many teams equipped to withstand a starting quarterback going down for 3 weeks, losing him for the first 3 weeks. You're going to have issues. 1 and 2 is probably about the expectation. Beyond that, we just talked about Garrett Wilson's injury, but beyond that, when you are playing with a backup quarterback for 3 weeks, and then you lose your number one receiver, during the third game, it's even tougher when you're down your top 3 tackles. And that's what the Jets are right now, because Mekhi Becton's gone for the season. Dwayne Brown, you beats me. I have no idea what's going on with Dwayne Brown. At this point, it would be a surprise. I'm expecting Dwayne Brown to never play for the Jets, and if he does, then it's a nice bonus. But then George Fant leaves this game with an injury, and I think Fant's been playing hurt. I don't think that I'm not sure that explains the entire extent of his struggles. I think a lot of it's probably just regression because he's never been as good as he was last year, and I was expecting a regression. But look, he's been on the injury report every week. He's missed practices every single week. At some point, you just have to say he's injured. And the fact he left the game after he got beat for that strip sack on Flacco, that's almost like one of those situations where you see it and you say, okay, well, that's where he realized, I just can't do this anymore. I'm not helping the team. Unfortunately, Connor McDermott comes in and looks worse. I mean, he barely can block anybody. So I really worry about putting Zach Wilson back into the lineup with Connor McDermott as the left tackle. And Max Mitchell at right tackle. Although I think Max Mitchell actually was okay yesterday. I have to watch the film, but it did not strike me that now I said that after the first game and I watched the film and Max Mitchell was a problem, but I don't get the feeling Max Mitchell was really the huge part of the problem as much as it was the left side of the line. Laken Tomlinson's not playing well. Jets gave him a lot of money this offseason. He's not playing well. So it's this weird situation because I feel like the offensive issues are easier to explain, and on some level they're easier to excuse. But the problem is that you're putting your young quarterback into this situation now. And yes, I think you'd hope Zach Wilson's going to give you more than Flacco. You'd hope he puts more on the table than Joe Flacco does. If he doesn't, then we got bigger problems here. But I feel like the longer lasting issue might be on the offense, even though the offense has a better excuse, because you're putting your young quarterback into a situation which you thought was going to be decent, but now, it's looking a little shaky, and you have to see how Zach handles it. But that's a topic for another day. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Please, if you enjoy the show, give it a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source. Big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. And hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening so you'll never miss an episode. Have a wonderful Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.